let's get started. I'm so excited to talk with you guys.
Awesome.
So for starters, how did you guys both get into writing? And whoever wants to jump in first, go ahead.
Oh, God, that's a good question. Do you want to go first or you want me? It doesn't matter.
I always remember like really liking writing when I was a kid, and I had a 8th grade teacher, Mr. Donahue, who we would have like a lot of hey sit down and write moments, and like I feel like that's where I really start getting a lot of like thought processes into the writing craft. But outside of that, it was always just like something fun I did on the side. I can remember being like really pushed the first time. I don't even know if he remembers this, but when I was probably a sophomore in college, Matt wrote a fan fiction about like basically Buffy meets Godzilla, and that was what I thought was basically the start of him as an author. I don't know if he'd agree to that particular point or not, though.
Yeah, I think I would say I started out just doing fan fictions for fun as writing. Mark and I grew up, and our parents were divorced, so we didn't have like a lot of things to do, especially in the summer. So I can recall us perhaps starting to write so that we could just entertain ourselves. And then I really got moving on writing when a magazine I read, G-Fan magazine, would publish stories featuring like Godzilla, but they were given a cease and desist order saying that they couldn't utilize those copyrighted characters anymore. So they did have a mascot character that I thought, well, I can do this. So I started writing short stories using their mascot character and submitting it to them, which they picked up. From there, I saw Jeremy Robinson's novel, Project Nemesis. It's just like the biggest kaiju series out there. So he was asking for artwork, and I can't do artwork, but I thought, well, what if I can do a short story with his character and the mascot from G-Fan as like a cross promotion? So he thought that was a great idea. I did that story. He gave it his blessing. It got published. From there, I reached out to other authors who I'd read and said, hey, you have a giant monster book, kaiju book. I feel like we can get some cross promotion if I can borrow your character to do a story for G-Fan with their mascot. And several of them said yes. And then one of them had suggested to me that, hey, you're pretty good at this. Have you thought about trying to write your own novel? And I hadn't, but they gave me the name of a publisher in Severed Press, and I submitted my first novel to them, and now I'm like 20 some novels in. So it's been
why are you mentioning a competitor right now? Don't mention a competitor.
Oh, okay, for an anonymous publisher.
But that's so cool that you've written that much. That's so cool. So another thing that I want to ask is I want to know more about your stories. So tell me more about your recent works, specifically these two.
Sure, you go ahead first.
Well, all credit due to for starters, my story goes all the way back to the fact that I remember, like, I think I was a senior in high school. Yeah, I found the book The Beast by Peter Benchley about the giant squid that just ate everything, and I was fascinated by it, and it became an on-running joke that every year, whenever as a family we would go away on vacation, I always needed a book about a giant shark or giant monster eating people while I was laying out on the beach and looking at the waves. So it always became a fantasy of mine to just one day write a shark novel. And 6-7 years ago, I sat down and I wrote like the first 1,000 words of that story, and then nothing. I did absolutely nothing. And then this past January, Matt, of all people, reached out to me and was like, hey, this company is looking for like creature horror, did you ever think about doing that shark book again? And I was like, I mean, I could. And the next thing you know, I have a contract, and I'm like, well, at the time it was also, it was January. I had a horrifically broken foot, so I couldn't go anywhere. And I was like, well, I can just sit down and type. And the next thing you know, here we go. I have whale shark out right there.
There you go.
Yeah, for me, I was reached out to by a representative from Raventail who asked me to do a couple horror stories. Yep. So I did, first I did Agent 666, and then I did The Final Host. And then it was the call Mark's talking about where they had reached out to me and said, hey, are you interested in doing like a sea monster tale? So I said I was, and I said, my brother I know has been working on one for a while, and honestly, I think Mark is a better writer than I am in terms of nuts and bolts and such, like with combos. And
who might argue with people who
are
right?
You would agree to that as well. But I said I think he'd be really good for this. But anyway, I wanted to do a story that was not the typical sea monster story, because I feel like there's a lot of basically like Jaws format stories where it's like a monster is attacking a land or something like that. And I said, what if I was to do like a body horror story in line with something like Jeff Goldblum's The Fly, where there's this person who is kind of changing into a monster. So it's not just the horror of like these attacks that are occurring. I did have those in there as well, but I really wanted to go through like the psychological horror of my body is turning into something that I can't control. And that's not only potentially dangerous to me, but to my family and my loved ones as well. So that's kind of the route I had tried to take with that story.
Another question. I know like you guys love creature horror so much, I'm assuming, obviously. But what are some of your favorites outside of, say, like books? What about film? What are some of your favorites from childhood to even now? What are some that you would recommend to other people?
For creature feature stories, I think Mark would agree with this too. We grew up, because we're old, at the time when there was like a Saturday afternoons, they'd have like creature feature movies that we would catch, right? So we would watch those a lot. I can remember being heavily influenced by the Ray Harryhausen movies, the stop motion photography wizard who did things like, just the other night I was rewatching Jason and the Argonauts. It's such a fantastic movie that features creatures in it, or 20 Million Miles to Earth, Beast in 20,000 Fathoms. So those types of things got me hooked initially. And then as I got older, it became more things like Alien and Predator, things that definitely delved more into the horror genre. I grew to like a lot. I think the other thing that would have a really big influence on me would be the 90s Gamera trilogy from Japan, actually, where when we grew up, Gamera was like so terrible, it's unwatchable. Like you'll see most of the older 60s and 70s movies like on a mystery science theater type of thing. But the 90s trilogy is almost like the Dark Knight trilogy for monster movies. And, like the MonsterVerse, the current like Godzilla series borrows a lot from it. Those would be things in film wise that had inspired me. What about you, Mark?
A lot, like I have a 9-year-old daughter right now, and she's been just absolutely obsessed with the world of Jurassic Park lately. So I would have to give a nod to all the Jurassic Park movies in that particular vein. A lot of the things that Matt was talking about, the like 90s Godzillas and Gameras. Also, there was a string there in the 90s of some like really cool made for TV type of monster creature features, like Peter Benchley's White Shark became one called Creature, ironically enough. And then I remember that there was another one called Gargantuan, and there was a TV show like in the early 2000s. Matt, I think you remember this one, Surface on NBC.
That's one of my favorite TV shows, like ever.
I love Surface. So
yeah, Surface was fantastic. It's a shame it got canceled, because it was the first time you saw like a creature features ongoing series on TV. You'd get the occasional like creature in an anthology series of something like Tales from the Dark Side, or something along those lines, but not one that was an ongoing serialized series like that.
So good. I have like the DVD collection of it. I watch it like every year because it's so good.
Oh yeah, it was so good.
Yeah.
Nim, right? Nim was the name of the small one.
Yeah. Miles.
Oh yeah, that was a great show.
Okay, so another thing I noticed, both of your books, sharks. Do you guys see yourself writing more about sharks? And I noticed that they're both kind of like hybrid mixes. So will you continue doing that?
Yes. So I just had come out this book 2, the Metamorphosis series, The Hunt, because it was originally planned as a 3-part series. And I think we can say now, because we put it on social media, that the 3rd part of that series will be a prequel to Mark's book. So we're going to do a crossover, because my book's more of a time period piece. And we'll be doing a crossover with Carcharodon from my Metamorphosis series and Whale Shark from Mark's series. It's going to be something we both start working on soon. So, I could say that's, for me, it's really a dream come true to do an actual published work with Mark. Certainly we've done things just for fun, for our family before, but to work on something like this together, I think will be a blast. And sharks in particular, we both live near the Jersey Shore and grew up there. So thankfully, I don't recall ever seeing like a real large threatening shark in the water. We catch dolphins.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, thankfully. But I think that, being there, you're kind of submerged in the culture. We also live in the area where the shark attacks that inspired
1916
place. So it's like, people still talk about it over 100 years later, being a thing. So I think that, our love of sharks comes from there. And then we've always been interested in things like, Shark Week on Discovery Channel type of deal. We look forward to it.
I just found out remember the old Shark Weeks that Sci-Fi used to do? There's a streaming service called Tubi that's doing it now. It's called Shark or Bite Fest. So it's a free streaming service. So I would also add in there the thought of, I just had a meeting yesterday with Nick Whale, head of the company, and he spoke glowingly of you, Erika, by the way. He was talking about an author who I had almost a cult following for, who ended up being signed by Raventail, Michael Cole, who is also a big time shark writer, and I've read a number of his stories. And in the conversation, Nick brought up the fact that Michael recently wrote a book called Meat Eaters, which was more of like giant lizards.
Right here.
Do you really? There you go. Yeah, so it's like a raptor dinosaur type of thing.
Right. Yeah.
And he Michael said he was a little out of his comfort zone writing something that wasn't a shark. He's like, maybe I should go back to shark. And then it's like, but all the praise you're getting is people like, oh, I'm so glad he tried something other than sharks. So that got the juices in my mind thinking, like, I should look at maybe branching out. I am working on book 2 of what I know it's called Whale Shark, but it's all about the naval R&D, and that we have a sea monster in it. It's not necessarily going to be a shark, but I would like to venture out of that realm at some point and experiment what else I can do in the way of creatures.
Yeah, because creature as a whole is so big, and if you were to splice it, you can create whatever you want.
Correct.
Yeah. Is there anything that's really far out there that's maybe not in sea but on land that you would be interested in writing about someday?
I mean, I could write about anything from werewolves to dinosaurs to any of that particular thing. I probably have somewhere in my house notebooks upon notebooks of little short stories of different monsters I've written about that I could go back and probably flesh out a couple thousand words onto and try to see if I can't pull that into something else.
Yeah, for me, I have the 2 with Raventail, with Agent 666 and the final host. Agent 666 is based on, very quickly, the idea that a child's possessed by a demon and their priests are unable to exorcise the demon. So they use an actual artifact called the Chains of St. Peter, in which case I had it where they attach it to the child. And the more that the chains are physically wrapped around him, the more the demon is restrained in his mind. But if he can have the chains unwrapped, sort of like Spawn or Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. So if he unwraps him a little bit, he turns into the physical form of the demon. But if he unwraps him too much, to use the chains as like an offensive long-range weapon, it gives the demon more freedom in his mind. So it's like kind of a balance of how far he can push himself when he needs to, without going over the edge. And then I had that character appear, or different versions of the characters. I have it where there's different Agent 666 throughout history. So a version of him does appear in the tail end of book 2 of Metamorphosis, and then figures heavily into the Hunt, book 2 of that series. The final host I originally wrote as like a Lovecraftian type of horror, where its focuses on what we perceive as angels coming sort of like in Revelations to end the world, and the response to that. So it's kind of based on the fact that an ancient giant dinosaur was found with a high dose of radiation in its bones. So the government was trying to experiment on it with nanotech to see if it could revive it. They do. And it's the reviving of this creature that alerts the cherubim, as I call them, that their Earth has reached a certain level of technology, which they're searching for, that tells them it's time to bring an end to this before we can branch out and be a bigger threat. So then it becomes sort of like, the Earth trying to deal with the threat of this monster they've created through own Frankenstein, and then this cosmic horror that's coming for them at the same time. So I've done those 2, but I'd definitely be interested in doing more horror. In fact, like I was thinking about going back to Nick and discussing maybe doing sort of a book that would straddle both his horror and his Old West in like a story about Agent 666 in the Old West, like a version of him at that time, which I think would be pretty fun. So that's like on my back burner after I finish the book with Mark.
Well, very cool. Very cool. So the last question that I have for you guys today is for any people that are watching today, any like aspiring writers, what's some advice that you would give to people who are pursuing writing?
Well, I'll start with that. I'm actually by trade a middle school language arts teacher, so I give this advice all the time. The most primary thing I would say is, write for an audience of yourself, because if you are not entertained by what you're writing, then no one else is going to be entertained by what you're writing. So write what you know and write for yourself. I can remember I was like, again, that Mr. Donahue I talked about from years ago. I don't know. I had this strange urge to write like some sort of devil worshipping story one time. And he's like, yeah, I wouldn't do that. He's like, what do you know about it? I was like, nothing really. He's like, then don't write that. Write something that would interest you. And
Right.
since then, I've thought about it. It's like, yeah, it makes complete and utter sense. Like outside of what I've written for Raventail, I've written a children's book series about superheroes with reference book powers, so that they can go around and save the world, and it's grammar as it goes. So I mean, superheroes and grammar, two things I'm very closely linked to because I'm a language arts teacher. So it entertained me. I love it, and it goes forward from there. So yeah, I would say write what you know and write for you.
Yeah, I would add on to that like Mark had said, write what you know. So like I work as a special education teacher, and like I've written stories where a special education teacher has taken applied behavior analysis and used it to train monsters, and people are always like, wow, you seem to like really know what you're talking about there. And it's like, oh yeah, it's what I do for my job. So I do try to branch out from there, but like Mark said, I wouldn't try to tackle something that's very far out of my field of knowledge. So stick with things you know. I think two other important things I can say is one, and this is something I learned and Mark helped me out a lot with, and I'm still getting better at, is to get better at things like grammar and punctuation and stuff like that. I'll often I currently work as a work-based learning coordinator. So people ask me about, so I find jobs for students. They'll ask me about like being a writer. And I say, well, you can do it as like a part-time thing unless you really break free. That's what I do. But I said, you got to learn the punctuation, the grammar, formatting, and I'll compare it to like playing sports. I'll say, nobody likes to learn to play defense in basketball. It's hard and it's not super exciting, but it makes your game a lot better. So it's the same thing with punctuation and such. The other thing I would say is set a goal for yourself. So I try to write at least 1,000 words every day. Sometimes I throw the entire 1,000 words out. Sometimes it's, be able to be tweaked. Sometimes it's really good, but I find if I do it that way, it becomes like a routine. So like, if you get into a workout routine, you tend to stick to it. So if people are trying to write, set a goal for yourself, 500, 1,000 words a day. Just try to at least do that each day so you feel like you're always progressing and growing.
Very nice. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Hey, thanks for everything you've been doing on TikTok.
Oh, it's been so much fun.
Really appreciate it.
It's been so much fun. I know a lot of this stuff is like comedy, but it gets so many views and people get so interested in the books. So many people are saving the videos too, so that they're going to go back to them, which has been really exciting.
Awesome. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you again. We do appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Well, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. And
you as well.
I can't wait to see what else you guys put out there. It's so exciting.
Awesome.
Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
Bye.